Hi, we're covering the Budget Committee hearing live. This is Tuesday,
The 19th.
April 19th. Yes, I had to think about it for a second there.
Yeah, I'm here too, but I'm behind the camera.
Yes. All right. Enjoy.
Well, I don't know about that.
Enjoy our coverage.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the Josephine County Budget Committee. Today is Tuesday, April the 19th, 2016. It is 4 p.m. And we have with us today our full Budget Committee. The purpose of this meeting is to discuss the fiscal year 2016-17 budget for Josephine County and to allow public comment. I'd like to have each of the Budget Committee members state their name, beginning with Mr. Welch.
Stephen Welch.
Margaret Goodwin.
Jim Brumback.
Simon Hare, Josephine County Commissioner. Good afternoon, everyone.
And Keith Eck, Josephine County Commissioner.
And Cheryl Walker, Chair. So I am not intending to be Chair of the Budget Committee. The process is for us to elect a new Chair of the Budget Committee. And so I would like to, at this time, open nominations for a Chair of this 2016-17 Budget Committee.
Madam Chair, as you are the chair, can we start with the Pledge of Allegiance as we typically
That's a
do?
good
Oh,
idea.
sorry.
That's
That's
okay.
all right.
As long as you're still-
Thank you for reminding me.
Keith finds it repetitive.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, thank you, Commissioner Hare. Again, I will open this for nominations for the Chair of the Budget Committee. Do I have any nominations?
I'd like to nominate Margaret Goodwin.
Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
I declined to be chair. This is only my second term on the budget committee, so I think it's probably more appropriate for someone with more experience.
Okay, since she would not serve, do you withdraw your nomination, Mr. Brumback?
Yes, I do. I also would not want this privilege, and Steve is new, and so I would nominate Simon Hare.
Well, shoot, I'll second that in a heartbeat.
You would.
Do you wish to accept, Commissioner Hare?
Well, I don't mind doing it. I've probably done it at least twice before. It's been a little while, but it's not, it's really just guiding the group through this process, and so there's no greater responsibility than just that. And I don't have any problem doing that.
Okay, so I have a motion and a second. Do any further discussion? Okay, roll call, please.
Mr. Welch,
Yes.
Ms. Goodwin,
Yes.
Mr. Brumback,
Yes.
Mr. Hare,
I'd like to vote no, but I'm going to vote yes.
Mr. Heck,
Yes.
Ms. Walker.
And yes, motion carries. So we now have a new chair of the Budget Committee for this year. I will gladly pass down this gavel to Commissioner Hare. Next time you can sit at this end, but we won't do the
No,
shuffle
no, it's
today.
fine. No, fine. Great. So moving right along with our agenda, I'm going to try to get us through this quickly. I think the intent of this meeting is really just for information to start with. I think we're going to see in our schedule that we outlined that the deliberations are going to be done at subsequent meetings. But we'll go on to item number 3 of our agenda, which is to elect a vice chair / secretary of the Budget Committee. So we'll open the floor for nominations. I'm not really sure what this position does, but they serve in the absence of a
If you're
chair.
not here.
Secretary, I don't think you have to take notes or
I'd like to nominate
provide hors d'oeuvres, appetizers.
Others or that? Well, I would like to nominate Margaret Goodwin since she has been here before. I think you could fill in case Commissioner Hare was not here. Would you not mind doing that?
All right, I will accept that nomination, provided that there are no duties.
No foreseen.
Well, second that. Thank you, Mark.
Any other nominations? Any other nominations? Any other nominations? Nominations for vice chair, secretary are closed. And all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously for Margaret Goodwin to be the Vice Chair / Secretary of the Budget Committee to serve for fiscal year 16-17. Crazy to be saying that, just crazy. Budget Officer presents the budget message for proposed budget year fiscal 2016-17. Mr. O'Hare, our esteemed Finance Director and Budget Officer.
Good afternoon, Budget Committee. Thank you for being here and meeting to take care of the budget for 16-17 for Josephine County. The budget message, one of the main requirements of Oregon budget law is that I present the budget message and the budget so that and identify major issues or changes within that budget. So I am pleased to present the fiscal year 16-17 annual proposed budget for Josephine County. All the budgets are balanced as required by Oregon budget law, which means that resources match or exceed the projected annual requirements. This budget message outlines the financial priorities of the county and highlights major changes to the funds. The Government Finance Officers Association of the United States and Canada has given the Distinguished Budget Presentation Award to Josephine County for the 15-16 budget, which is our 4th year in a row. The award is the highest form of recognition in governmental budgeting and shows that our budget document reflects nationally recognized guidelines for effective budget presentation. It also recognizes our open and accountable budget process, as well as our commitment to provide an accessible budget document to the citizens of Josephine County. The purpose of this first meeting is for the Budget Committee to receive the budget message, and receive public comment. In addition, we have scheduled presentations by the Elected Officials Compensation Committee, the Juvenile Justice Director, and the District Attorney. Future meetings and presentations will be determined by the Budget Committee. I want to talk a little about changes in the budget book. This year, we've brought a new format to the budget book using recommendations from the GFOA, the Government Finance Officers Association, the Oregon Department of Revenue, who is responsible for Oregon budget law, and popular budget presentations. We've incorporated the following features into the budget book. We provided an expenditure graph for each program or department. We have grouped expenditures into categories. You'll be familiar with those categories because they're the same ones as you've seen in prior years. We've also grouped revenues into their categories. By presenting program activity visually and in categories, we hope to enhance the readability of complex accounting information and to make the budget accessible to the average person. That is the goal. The budget book continues to meet all the requirements of Oregon budget law, and we hope it will meet the needs of the citizens of the county. The budget book is a work in progress. We plan several improvements over time, including more information on program deliverables and goals. So on February 11th, 2016, the Board of Commissioners reaffirmed their established goals to provide direction related to the big picture rather than listing individual actions or activities. Each department has included in their budget how their program meets the following 3 goals. Improve community outreach and communication to the public by investing in technology that will improve efficiencies within the county departments and provide enhanced service to citizens. Developing a sustained plan for all mandated and essential county government programs, and to provide access to county services to the citizens of Josephine County in a transparent, open, and professional manner. The Board of County Commissioners also provided several directives to be used in preparing the budget document. The main directives are: budgets are at a level consistent with the current operating service levels. In other words, a status quo budget. So the budget you have before you is in all significant areas status quo with our current 15-16 budget. We budget only for mandatory and or self-supporting programs. And third, we address county goals and clearly define program purpose and outcome. Summary of funds. In the proposed budget book, in the financial summary section, you'll find a summary comparison of budgets. This will give you a comparison of the current budget year versus the proposed budget. The total budget for fiscal year 16-17 for all funds equals $90,362,000. This represents a 5% increase over the prior year, or approximately $4.5 million. The major changes are, we have a $610,000 increase in public health, mostly in the animal control fund and the all-care contract, mostly due to the all-care contract. $156,000 decrease in grant project funds due to the ending of the CDBG grant for housing. A $1.9 million increase in our transit program, which is due to a pass-through grant to the city of Grants Pass. $772,000 increase in our roads and bridges fund for various public works projects, and those projects are outlined in the capital projects section of your budget book. And a $494,000 increase in the equipment reserve fund, major purchases being a line striper truck for public works and bus replacement, 3 bus replacements for transit program. Proposed budget development, the general fund, we're maintaining current service levels in the general fund department. The proposed general fund budget for 16-17 is $12,560,000. Total operating costs increased approximately 5% over last year. 3 programs had notable changes. The assessor had increased grant revenue and expense. Emergency management had increased, is now budgeting for building maintenance. And we did that so that we could include those costs in the grant reimbursement for emergency management. And then planning department also reorganized their personnel and added 1 FTE. Josephine County requires the majority of the county programs to be self-sustaining through fees, grants, state contracts, and other revenue sources that do not rely on property taxes or general fund support. Significant changes. I've already identified the major changes in this budget. However, I want to highlight 2 programs in the current budget that could be looking at significant change beginning July of 2017. First, the Animal Protection and Regulation Program. Animal Shelter is budgeted to receive approximately $535,000 from local option levy of 8 cents per thousand passed by the citizens of Josephine County in May of 2014. This is the last year of the 3-year levy. This levy provides almost 2/3 of the current operating revenues. So after this year, we can anticipate a significant reduction in services when this revenue ends. That's animal control. Next is public safety. Revenues for public safety are budgeted to include shared receipts of $2 million. We don't anticipate SRS, ONC timber funds for this coming fiscal year. So we budgeted the shared receipts of $2 million. Transfer from the general fund of $2.5 million, a beginning fund balance of $5.4 million, and dedicated revenues of $3.5 million. However, the proposed budget shows an ending fund balance in public safety of $1.9 million, and that's the point of all these numbers. We start with $5.4 million, we end with $1.9 million. That's a reduction of $3.5 million in the public safety fund. So we've not budgeted and we do not anticipate ONC SRS timber revenues in fiscal year 2016-17. And it remains to be seen whether or not Congress will renew the SRS program. If not renewed by Congress, then we can anticipate a significant reduction in services in fiscal year 17-18. Also, you might note in the graph, and we'll talk about this next meeting, if the budget committee decides to, we'll have the sheriff and public works make a presentation. but you'll notice that the graph is fairly stable for the last several years, 3 years, 4 years. But that's because it's been stable at a much lower amount than what it used to be. The graph only goes back 3 years, and it was 4 years ago that we had major cuts in 2012. Conclusion, Josephine County is able to maintain essential services in most programs, although at reduced levels, because of the policies put in place and maintained by the Board of County Commissioners. In the proposed budget book, the introductory section, you'll find a list of the efforts made by the county in response to our budget constraints. We're facing challenges, especially in public safety, but service reductions and other strategic efforts have been implemented that will allow the county to continue to operate within a balanced budget. I look forward to reviewing the proposed budget with you, and I wish to thank the many individuals in the various departments who are responsible for preparing the budget. Special thanks goes to Christy Carlson, our budget analyst, who spent many hours ensuring that the budget document meets the collective requirements of the county and the Government Finance Officers Association, Department of Revenue. These budget meetings are being recorded and will be available online afterward. The budget book and some associated budget information is available on the county website. In addition, a printed version of the budget book is available for review at the library, the board's office, and the finance office. Respectfully submitted, Arthur O'Hare, Finance Director and Budget Officer.
Thank you, Mr. O'Hara. Are there any questions right now of what's been released?
Well, I do actually have some comments, and I don't know if now is the appropriate time or if we should wait until after the presentations by the department heads. I don't want to waste their time.
Yeah, I think if there's anything specific for the budget officer, based on what you just said, but if it's something kind of your own fruition, it'll be something later that we could address on the agenda. We'll make sure that we find time to do that.
Thank you, that'd be fine.
Okay. Anyone else for any questions? I wanted to make a little bit of a clarification, and I think it might just kind of been glossed over as you presented it pretty well, but in the host of a lot of other things. It's the differentiation between ONC, SRS, shared receipts, and that whole element. I think it can be confusing for people when the extension came in 2015. The legislation explicitly called for that as an extension of expired legislation in 2013. So it was really a payment for 2014 and 15. So when you say shared timber receipts, really that's your projection, and we don't really know, but that's what you're talking. I'm not clarifying for you because I think you understand it, but for everybody else, it's kind of a nuance that we haven't done this in quite some time. I think it's been 15 years since we've done specifically shared receipts. 2001 was when the first extension of Secure Rural Schools took place, and so our projection is that it's going to be somewhere around $2 million. A significant reduction in the SRS payment that we just received for 2015, which was roughly $4.5-ish million with some other things. So just that is a clarification. It's confusing, it's complicated, and actually we're still learning things about what is it like to be on shared receipts. That's a little different. There was another point that you made that I think I would like to drive home, was in the book there's a chart, and it's really great to have these graphics. I want to thank the finance office because just a quick version going through, it can provide anybody kind of a basic understanding and information about where we've been and where we're going. What I looked at it preliminarily, and I've been here for a couple of years, longer than that chart. What it doesn't express is the significant reduction with the funding that was taking place in the year prior to the chart. And so if you look at that, you'd say, wow, we've actually done really well building back some of these public safety departments since 2012. What you didn't see is the 10-11 budget where we were in excess of where we are now and how we've done a dramatic reduction. And that was really as a result of the Secure Rural Schools funding going away and us being diligent in preparing for these final years of the final payments so that we actually had something here at the end. So that was all I wanted to say about those two things. I think we're going to move on if there's no questions. Yes, sir.
Means you brought it up. Also mentioned from Mr. O'Hare's report that we have in the written form, it's good to remind ourselves that SRS expired, as he says, expired in 2007. That's when SRS expired. It has been continuingly dripped out on basis on other issues or tacked onto other bills or the helium bill and those kinds of things. But the SRS monies, those ended in 2007. And that we need to understand that and realize to continue it, it's not being continued, the money line is being stretched very thin on various other acronyms. But the SRS money ended in 2007, and that has not been yet been renewed. And that's the serious pill of it all. And that's what we're struggling with, to get some solidification so that we know and can budget what are we talking about, how much money do we have, or what do we have coming. And that's the struggle. But you delineated it very well in the written form. I appreciate that.
Yeah, the essence of the original legislation in the Title III money is really the telltale sign, those $2008 that we no longer have any more of with the greatest discretion. Douglas County is the only remaining county that I'm aware of that has them. And they were given with a big, broad scope, and every extension past that has been whittling down how much and what you can do with those monies. And now it formally expired. Any extension in 2015, technically, there's no extensions right now. So hopefully that point's been driven home. To move on, before we did so to the Elected Officials Compensation Committee, I think it would be appropriate. I want to thank the private sector members of the Budget Committee for serving, and I also want to recognize 2 members in our audience who actually served on the Budget Committee in years past. And I won't say for how long, because I can't remember if it was 3 to 6. It sounds like a sentence. But we have Mr. Fahey in our audience, and then moving on to Mr. Larry West. He's going to present us item number 5, I believe, which is the Elected Officials Compensation Committee recommendation. So, Mr. West.
Mr. Chair, if you would have Mr. West describe a little bit about the makeup and the purpose of the committee.
That'd be great.
I absolutely intend to do that as part of my presentation. Because it's way overdue, and also there's some, because this is an election year, there's a lot of misunderstanding about this particular process.
I think if you just, they're trying to adjust to your voice, and when you talk real loud or lean back, that messes them up. Just keep talking in the same tone.
Try and freeze. How's that?
Perfect.
Freeze. Let me briefly give you the outline of what I'm going to present. I'm going to go over our standing and what this committee is about, so that the audience and the Budget Committee understand really what it is. Secondly, I want to talk about specifically the purpose and what we're challenged to deliver to you. And I'd like to point out, this is just recommendations of comparable data and a review. And you will hear me say that again and again. All decisions on money will be made in this committee up here, the Budget Committee. And our position is to help assist you based upon technical data. We will be evaluating positions, not persons. Very important. Having said that, I want to read our recommendations to you. I'll take some time to give a little bit of a demonstration of actual facts in the effect of what we're trying to do as far as 2 policies. And then lastly, with your courtesy, then I'd like to hold all questions until we get to the last, and then go ahead and give me questions. Be happy to answer them. I have brought a prop with me because I want to be on level with you. And I will actually be using this as a prop to use more than just words to illustrate the new policies we're looking for. Having said that, let me begin. The Elected Officials Compensation Committee have met and studied many statistical documents and other relevant material pertaining to the wage and salary compensation of the 10 elected officials of Josephine County. The study was based upon an Oregon state requirement to provide non-biased comparable study to other counties in the state. Let me reiterate standing. This goes back to state statutes, ORS 204.12, paragraph 3. And then it was backed up a few years later by a legal case right here in this county. And that was looking at Section 20, which is compensation. Compensation as pointed out in the charter. And both of those cases determined, among other things, that the Oregon state statutes preempt Section 25 of this charter right here. So I'm speaking from the position of state statutes, not our county charter. And our legal department, here's the laws and the challenges to that. Down here's the Josephine County court case that actually happened here. This happened in 1990. So where I'm coming from, a position that's been in place for 26 years. And I wanted to point that out this particular time because there are some misinformation running around of still having 30,000 as a maximum that county commissioners can have, and erroneous information like that. Having said that, let me continue on. The study was based on Oregon state requirements to provide non-biased, comparable study data to like counties in the state. Let me give you those specific like counties. They are Benton, Cruz, Douglas, Klamath, Lynn, Polk, Umatilla, Yamo, Lincoln, and Josephine counties. They all seem to be a lot of O and C old counties, and they're all poor. We did not say Willamette Valley, we did not say Portland, we did not say Jackson. However, we did look at Jackson because it does affect us. Affect us in terms of something that's starting to happen here. Val Shepard used to be the public health director. She took a walk for $25,000 by driving down the street. Now we've had one of our officials also take a walk, and he'll increase his pay too. So our elected officials are now becoming affected by not only an improving economy, but other locations upping the ante and giving them a lot more money to take a walk. And last week, our county next door, Jackson, gave most all of their elected officials pretty large increases. So that's the only reason I bring it up. From all the comparable data, however, of the listed comparable counties which I've stated, we developed these following recommendations based upon clear goals. There's 4 of them. Number one, again, use comparable data. Number 2, concern for the ability to attract and retain qualified officials. The ability to maintain specialized talent. And 4, to keep hold of our experienced staff. We need that desperately. As we look at the gap that continues to occur due to the lack of funding in the county, we're making these specific policy recommendations. Notice they're not monetary. We recommend specifically that all salary adjustment to elected official positions that has fallen more than 5% of average total to comparable counties in comparable positions. Otherwise, we have a bubble here on a level. We want that bubble to be in the middle. That's what we call average. And we call that average a 5% band. If it's this high, the budget committee may elect to have a reduction in wages. If it's down, the bubble's this side, that means we're way under. We're trying to stay within a 5% bubble of comparable data. Now let me give you an example. Let's assume the county clerk is 13% under compared to the average salary. Therefore, this policy would recommend that the budget committee adjust the salary accordingly to that single position to bring it within that 5% bubble. Same thing if it's too high, you may want to adjust. Okay. Recommendation number 2. recommend that the Budget Committee recognize longevity, experience, tenure of the 10 elected officials by implementing a tiered salary step system based on re-election. One example was Lincoln County, which I have data if you want to see it, where the base rate is determined at the first term. In the event the elected official is re-elected to a second term, then the base salary is increased by 5%. What do we gain by that policy? The policy decision eliminates the need to eliminate across-the-board increases for similar positions, such as, let's use this example, county commissioners, 3 in our case. However, with this policy, it recognizes the success of any particular individual. It recognizes his success by the voters who voted for him or her. And the county gains by retaining the valued experience of that person. If the official does not gain re-election, the position falls back to the, obviously, the beginning level, like any other position. Again, this study group did not look at the person in any job, but rather looked at how to provide the best fairness to the position and performance. And that performance, again, is determined by the voters to a large degree. Josephine County expects its elected officials to serve its residents well, often with additional workloads, personal expense of managing individual election campaigns, dealing with turnover that impacts workloads, and etc. Our recognition recognizes the hard work that is done by the individuals that have been elected and provides a systemic way to reach comparability with others doing the same work. Having said that, I would like to give you some recommendations and examples. Number one, to be clear, we're back to the level. The average I'm going to talk about of all these 10 counties are here. Josephine County, 100% are down here. Not one official's average has met the bubble. Yeah, some of them do, but some are way below that 5% bubble I talked about. None are above that bubble. Looking at the first policy, anybody outside in the negative of that bubble, we looked, and first of all, the assessor was one of them. She's 8% under, negative. So if we follow that policy, we recommend she have a 3% increase. Policy number 2 kicks in now because she had to be reelected. That's an additional 5% increase. With those two together, the assessor's average is here. If you follow that recommendation, she's still down here. Well, she's getting very close to that bubble, and that's fine. We looked at the county clerk, which is at 5% within the bubble, just barely outside of it. So no change. County commissioners in the bubble, within that 5% of average for all the 10 counties. However, we have a policy number 2. We do have one county commissioner that was re-elected. We strongly recommend that that person have a 5% increase. Let's go to the district attorney, county district attorney. Within the bubble. So no change there. Let's look at our legal counsel. We find that person to be minus almost 7%.
So just to clarify, I don't mean to interrupt your presentation, Mr. West, but we in Josephine County, like most counties, compensate our district attorney proportionally, just a margin of their total salary.
I'm talking legal here, our legal counsel.
Back to the first one.
Oh, yeah.
Just the first
I'll
one.
get it.
So there was a clearness of what we contribute roughly 30,000, 20.
I can tell you exactly what that is, yeah.
But that was what your recommendation is, and that compensation was within the bubble. So now you can go on to.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Otherwise, I would have said something.
Great.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I'll cover that again just for that clarity later on. Thanks for the question. That was relevant. I appreciate that. Legal counsel is outside 6.59%. Is outside the bubble. We recommend a 2% increase. This is legal counsel. All right. The sheriff is over 11% under at the present time. Obviously, we are looking to put him back in that bubble within a 5% variance. So we're looking for a 6.25% increase for the sheriff's office. The surveyor we handled last year, and that's a special situation, it's a part-time job. We see no change to change that at this time. The treasurer's in the bubble. And even though, I'll talk about that a little bit later, we're evaluating the position, not the hard work of the person. And I'll mention that briefly and let you make up your own mind on that. I've attached, and I'll hand to the secretary, the specific numbers on the e-schedule we recommend to the secretary for your later review, because you're the one making this monetary decision. Now I've really told you what I wanted to say. I'm open for questions. Jim, you look like you have something on your mind.
That's a good look to have, Bill. I want that look. Anyone? That's good.
Hey, Margaret, brother.
I'm not sure where this extra money is going to come from.
That's not our determination, that is your determination.
That's right.
We are position only, fairness, comparable data, or static quants. That's what I am, and that's where I stand. I don't get into your business.
I have no further questions for you.
Mr. Steve, you've got something I can tell.
I do. Explain to me the election bump. All right, so if you're reelected, what happens if you're reelected?
Fine, it goes up another 5%.
So as
And
long
if
as-
we're fortunate enough, we'll do it again and again and again. And I have examples here from Lynn County where they do it for 24 years in advance. Look what we've gained in our case. Let's look at Commissioner Hare. He was a mentor for the other two county commissioners. That's an extra effort. He could be the mentor for the next two, or at least one. We know that. And even the AOC has recognized him as delivering great value. So it's not just 6 years, it's not just the time. You shouldn't pay him a basic rate of the person walking in the back door. We're getting great value out of this gentleman. We want to reward that position because he earned it, and the voters said so.
I do have another comment. We've had cases, in just as an example, if you used examples, I'll use the example of Steve Rich. He was our legal counsel for something like 30 years, reelected time after time, with nobody ever running against him. So he would keep getting 5% increases every time he got reelected with no one running against him. The first time someone actually ran against him, he was defeated. I think that's a good argument against having a 5% bump every time you get reelected.
Could you apply that to Mr. Haugen, who had 24 years now?
Well, Mr. Haugen never got a 5% increase every time he was reelected, did you, Harold?
I very wish that
So,
you
Mr. West, I think to reiterate, your initial intent was to evaluate positions and
You
not
got it.
people.
That's
So
right.
maybe by using me as an example, I don't know if that cuts both ways, but it's better to just look at what the person is expected to do that is different than the first time around.
Yeah.
My job wasn't everybody's first time around. I'm not supposed to instruct, but I served with 6 commissioners so far in my first term, and I was doing a fair amount of help that whole time, whether I served one or twice. So I think you can, as I often do, argue both sides of it.
Mhm.
But there's certainly no less responsibility having been elected twice and then helping other people along every time.
Right.
That kind of goes with the territory, and frankly, it kind of goes with the job.
That's one reason we decided we were going to evaluate the position. because it changes with, like Margaret says, you know, it changes with the change. And that's exactly what you want. But it still keeps us within a bubble of fairness of what you have to deliver. We didn't take in things like the economy, inflation, and, you know, all those things. We're looking for a model here, position that rewards success in all ways. Again, to the job, to the position, not the person. Yes, Jim?
If we accepted all your recommendations, how much would it cost?
I don't know. I'm going to stay out of that and let you do it. You're getting a finance director over here to give you.
But you don't have a number. If we went through these, you know, increase so much for the assessor and so on, you don't know what the dollar figure would be and how much that would.
I have the total. I don't have each specific one.
What is the total?
Say that again. What do you mean by total?
If we accepted all of your recommendations for this year,
Yeah.
how much total would that cost?
Okay, I'd be happy to do that. Each of the 4 recommendations for change, the assessor would be $77,762.
That's total.
That's, yeah.
He's interested in change, which would be the current rate
Oh, the current
minus
rate,
the proposed.
yeah, the current rate is $71,902. The proposed rate would be $77,762. All right. Let's go to the county commissioner. We have 1 in this case. The present, $75,392. And if you accepted this policy proposal, it would be $79,161. Legal counsel at present is $94,284. With this proposal is $96,169. And finally, the sheriff, and boy, this guy's underwater. He is, he's at 94. Oh, I'm off the column here. He's at 84,348. We recommend 89,619. Let me point some other things to be added to right here. Let's go back to the assessor. If our assessor was giving these 2 bumps, she would still be next to the lowest paid in the entire state. Let's go to the county commissioner. Compare him to the others. He'd be higher than 1 other person in the entire study. So we're not going out of whack here. I want to go to the legal counsel. There's a big difference here. There's 1 other person that's slightly lower than him. So you see, I'm really not adding a whole lot of dollars here. I want to go to the sheriff. There's a vast chasm there. The sheriff, there's 1 person below him in the entire study. So that kind of tells you we're being very conservative, but we're still trying to get into the bubble.
So those 4 recommendations would amount to less than $20,000.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Around 17,000 actually.
I'll let you determine that. Because I don't deal with those. Go ahead.
I mentioned that several of these positions are the second lowest in the state at current rates. I would like to point out that Josephine County is the second poorest county in the state as well, so that isn't actually that surprising.
Coos County beats us in several areas of the state.
I think he's saying study, not state. So it's really important that there are part-time commissioners, there's part-time, so it's the same. So those comparable counties.
Yeah, and this is why I didn't talk about the surveyor, because that's a part-time job here, but not in other places. And again, this comparable thing is, you've really got to balance your balls in the air to really get into a band. And that's what brought up the idea. Let's go with a bubble and put us within a band of comparability. And then over and above that, as the voters have voted, why don't we go along what they have to say too? So, Keith, do you have any questions here?
No questions?
Okay.
There is a point in our agendas over time that we will be discussing this again and actually making a decision on the recommendation. So today, I appreciate that, Mr. West. I just want to take questions on this, and if there are any, we can get you to answer them. Otherwise, we probably should move on with our agenda to make sure we have plenty of time for our staff and electeds that have been prepared to present.
Cool.
Are we good at this point? Mr. West, thank you so much for the presentation. So with that, moving on to the department presentations that have been pre-selected by our, based on preliminary discussions, the budget officer. And we have the first one would be Mr. Goodwin, who's the director of our juvenile justice department. Before you
419A012. This is one short paragraph, but there's a lot that we do in here. It says the juvenile department shall investigate every youth before the court, be present at every hearing, and take custody of those youth as directed by the court. That's the basis for all of the field work that we do, the court work that we do, and everything rolled into that. Like I said, there's a lot of meat in the ORS about different services that you can do and limitations around that, but that's the basics. So our priorities have always been in this area. They've changed a little bit over the years with different budgets and funding cycles, but the number one priority always is public safety. We do a lot of rehabilitative work with youth and families, but number one is always public safety. We feel that we get there in the best possible way by promoting successful youth. And that happens, we feel, that we can restore victims of juvenile crime, and you partnership with the available agencies that are there, in our case, Department of Human Services, Oregon Youth Authority, Alcohol and Drug Treatment Center, all of those. We definitely can't do the work by ourselves. That comes back around to a sense of community that we try to continually keep the kids engaged in. So referrals as it stands now, and I always preface this with the overall drop in juvenile crime referrals that happened in the middle of 2012 when we lost significant sheriff's patrols. We historically received about 30 to 40%, depending on the year, of our referrals from the sheriff's office, from rural patrols. Those numbers were immediately cut June of 2012 by about 25 to 30% when patrols went away, and they continue to maintain at about those levels. So most of the numbers that you see right here, that's about 90% Grants Pass Department of Public Safety, and about 10% all the other agencies, including the Oregon State Police Sheriff's Office. So the three basic areas that we deal with: criminal charges, which are any and all crimes. Just like adults get in trouble, kids get in trouble for all the same reasons. Violations are not necessarily criminal, but they are violations of the law. So possession of, say, less than an ounce of marijuana, and those types of violations. And then finally, with kids, we have status offenses. Those are things that only kids get in trouble for. So curfew, runaway, things like that. The 12-month period, 4/1/2015 to 3/1/16, just under 300 referrals. So the basic services that we provide: court services begin with a review of a felony charge by the DA. The DA devotes a certain amount of FTE to the juvenile department to review felony referrals. And so they review them. If they are legally sufficient, we proceed with the court process. And what we do in juvenile justice, and this is not widely known, we like to make this very clear, that we provide the service for kids in the court process. Everything that the district attorney does for the adult cases, we do for the juvenile cases, except for reviewing the felony referrals and trying the case. If it comes to a contested hearing, the DA steps back in and they try that case for us. Field services, the same thing. If you think of community corrections and everything that they do with an adult offender in the community, parole, probation services, community service, those kinds of things, we provide those through the juvenile department for kids in the system. And then finally, the informal. We do a lot of this. Best practices continue to say that the further a youth penetrates into the system, the better their chances are of recidivating. So we try to actually keep them out of court on the front end as much as possible. Be different, talked about this before. Criminal charges we break down into person-to-person crimes. Those are your assaults, things of that nature, property crimes, which would be theft, criminal mischief, those kinds of things, and criminal drug would be like heroin, meth. It's not so much marijuana anymore, but violations and status offenses. So, like I said, possession of less than an ounce of marijuana, minor specific acts such as minor possession of alcohol, and those kinds of things. Those services look very different depending on the risk level of the youth that we're dealing with. And so there's a wide spectrum depending on, is it the first time they get in trouble, is it the fifth time they get in trouble? So this is not at all comprehensive, but it shows a few things, that spectrum that I'm talking about. Everything from a letter that goes out to the youth and the parent, counseling, education classes that we have our counselor, probation staff formally trained to do these things. Informal supervision, those are the formal accountability agreements, or FAAs, that I talked about, where we try to have an intervention without getting that youth criminal record. Court services, like I talked about, getting the court all the way through the court process, and then eventually on probation and community supervision. Detention and community service for those youth that, for the community that requires safety from a juvenile offender. We do still maintain some level of detention. I'll talk about that in a little bit. For kids that are beyond our resources, we can commit them to the Oregon Youth Authority for either a residential treatment program or for a youth correctional facility, depending on the severity of the crime and the risk level of the youth. So 2016 and 17, we're down. This is just about, in my opinion, bare bones. We felt a little bit more staff retraction through a retirement this year. So we have 8 FTE, but 12 total employees, excuse me, in the juvenile department. 3 of those are transport officers, so they're part-time on call. And you see the breakdown there. We were running 5 probation officers / court counselors, 1 receptionist, 1 .5 legal secretary that does all the court filings and paperwork with the court, and we have a half-time. We replaced a full-time a couple of months ago senior administrative supervisor with a half-time office manager. There you see at the bottom, in our free time in juvenile justice, we have 3 ancillary programs that are administered under our department. They are the CAC, Children's Advocacy Center, which works closely with the district attorney for cases of child abuse and neglect. The Josephine County Court Mediation Program is one full FTE there. That's administered under juvenile, and the county prevention coordinator recently came under juvenile justice. So 2.6 FTE, that all 3 of those programs are primarily funded through state designated funds that come in and only to those programs. Real quickly, in 2015 and 16, we utilized a 3-bed detention contract with Douglas County, which gave us an aggregate bed day number of 1,095 days. We used that completely, exhausted it. I put in parentheses there that we didn't meet the community safety need because we weren't able to detain all of the youth that we would ordinarily detain under our normal risk assessment, just because of the limitation on the beds. And you see the breakdown there. Field services, court services is that's our current staffing configuration. And at any given time, and this fluctuates greatly depending on the season and that kind of thing. Right now we have 131 kids that we're dealing with those, or working with the staff that you see there. The savings that we were able to realize through the restructuring of our admin structure, like I said, we had a retirement of a 20-year county employee, senior administrative supervisor, that we replaced with a half-time office manager, and that will maintain the 3-bed detention contract, hopefully, if that's approved a little bit later by the board, and we'll have funds to essentially buy an additional 372 beds on an individual basis if the Douglas facility has the space. And so we'll essentially have a 4-bed contract if space is available, and that's where we decided we could best spend the savings from the personnel. Few of the in-house services that we provide: aggression replacement training, which is an evidence-based program for youth in trouble for aggressive, or not necessarily in trouble for aggressive crimes, but are risk assessed at being aggressive. Alcohol and drug education classes, individual counseling. We do a theft education class for our lower level offenders, have a pretty comprehensive community service program where the kids get, they go into the community and do community service projects, work off restitution, that kind of thing. And then our functional family therapy, FFT, is a very vital program. We do some pass-through dollars to options to provide that. So with that, I'll take any questions.
Any questions? Mr. Walker?
Mr. Goodwin, I heard you say in your presentation that we weren't meeting with our juveniles offenders, the community safety level. Is that a level of protection provided by the state? In other words, a number, perhaps a ratio of population to offenders, or is that the type of offenses? Would you explain what that concept means?
Well, to do that, I'll go back to the history and how we've done things, and I've been with the department now, I think, so going on 17 years. And the general practice, when we had our own facility, if a juvenile came in for any felony offense, we would do an intake on them into the facility. They would stay at least overnight, be assessed, and go through a process, and then we would decide whether or not they were appropriate, not only for community safety, but for the youth's own safety, sometimes home environments and things like that, to just make it not the right decision to release them home immediately. We also had the shelter program where maybe they didn't require the secure detention facility, but shelter was more appropriate. And so state law says what level of youth offender that you are allowed to detain legally. And we always took that as a policy here in Josephine County, as those are the ones that we would detain, and then we would go to work and decide who and when, where and how the release would happen. And we're just unable, oftentimes we get calls for these felony offenses that I'm talking about, and we don't have the bed space, so we have to tell law enforcement to cite and release that youth and just give them a ticket to appear in court.
Mr. Chair. So what you're telling me is that we have young people, these are all under 18 years of age, that have committed a felony, that we don't have the space to put them to protect them or the public, either one.
Correct. I won't say in all cases. When we have the bed space, we're able to do that, and when we don't, like I say, I always say you never know when or how kids are going to get in trouble. So sometimes we have very high numbers for a month at a time, and then it fluctuates that way.
Thank you.
I know you're aware of Hearts with a Mission beginning operation hopefully here in May, and Save Families. And you may be aware also the Church of the Valley is looking to start ministry similar to what's in Portland, where they have a grace organ called Every Child, that would help, both these programs would help get more foster parents in, working with our kids that are out of the system. I, of course, wish that we had more funding for what you're doing, but how much help will ministries like this be?
Well, the Hearts with a Mission, what they can do, if I understand their license. And through the OARs, they can take a youth on an emergency basis for up to 72 hours, and then with parental or guardian consent, can keep that youth longer. So it's a part of the same population that our shelter did serve. So a law enforcement officer comes upon a runaway youth in the middle of the night, they could take them to our facility. We could house that youth in our unsecured shelter. It's my understanding that Hearts can do that, but any and all of the youth that we dealt with will still be, it'll be a vital service, absolutely, and a piece of what we did, but definitely not all of it.
When I toured the Hearts with a Mission facility the other day, I asked some of those specific questions in regards to how youth would come in, whether they would take certain kinds of kids. Their goal is to reunite the families, and they do not take foster children. So it has to be a commitment by a parent. As you say, it's an emergency. I mean, if someone finds a kid on the street, they can take for emergency, but they can't keep them without parental permission. So if the problem is the parents, which it is with many of these kids, because kids are either thrown out or they're throwaway children, they don't have a place to go still. And of course, we don't put felons in Hearts with a Mission. So as you say, it's a piece, but it's not a solution. And I would like to, at this time, make clear that one of the candidates at the forum last night made the statement that the Hearts with a Mission was actually a program of the county, that we had outsourced it to Hearts with a Mission. That is not true. That is not a program of the county, but it is a piece to help with the problem, and that's a good thing. But I just want to make clear that that's not a county project. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Yeah.
Yes.
On the facility over on where the building is, I mean the juvenile facility is, part of it is the shelter side, part of it is the detention side. There are a total of 16 beds in detention. How many in the detention side?
Well, we had 14 beds, 14 detention and 16.
Yeah, 14. So of the 14 beds that were there and that they were used on a fairly regular basis, how many are we able to use now? Not in that facility, that's 0. But of those, we now have 3, 4, 2, and they're going up to Douglas County?
Yes, with proposed budget, we can average 4 youth a day. Now, we're guaranteed 3 a day. That 4th one is contingent upon their availability. The contract says we can have 3. And we ran into some of those issues in previous contracts where counties, they have the right to serve their own population first.
So we could conclude that we are now safe from any Measure 11 violating youth in Josephine County, or at least the beds that are available are adequate to meet the needs that we would have.
No. In fact, but for a large percentage of the last 2 fiscal years, we've had, we went months at one point with 2 of our 3 beds occupied by Measure 11 youth, and we typically see them for 90 to 120 days and sometimes longer.
And for people who might question, what is a Measure 11 youth?
Measure 11 youth are serious crimes that are mandated by law that they are waived to the adult system automatically. So murder, attempted murder, rape, sex abuse, things like that. If those are found legally sufficient by the DA, that's an automatic waiver by law to the adult court, not the juvenile justice system. And they just take a really long time to resolve those cases.
So the second half of that question that Commissioner Heck asked, what would it take in a budget, dollars-wise, for you to meet that? I'm struck by the idea that we're not, and then we haven't been for a while. One of the things that, like this chart also doesn't illustrate is where you were in fiscal year 11-12. That's the part of the story that says we did have our own juvenile shelter and detention facility. It was state-of-the-art when it was constructed, funded locally, and then there was just no funds for operations to continue past the expiration of Secure Rural Schools and those other funding streams. So we've got to tell that whole story about we used to be able to meet this need and be kind of locally proficient in this and not have to supplant, Douglas County utilizing their, we were using Jackson counties and spending, good taxpayer dollars up there as opposed to utilizing them here locally. So what is that number that kind of makes your system work just on the detention side?
Mhm. That's close, I mean, in today's numbers, that's close to 1 million. And to operate 24/7 our facility, and that gets intakes on a 24/7 day a week basis of youth that don't necessarily stay overnight. And we do a lot of that business. Law enforcement bringing youth, bringing it to us, we do an intake, and then we hand them back up to a parent or legal guardian or responsible adult. But the problem with our facility, it's not modular necessarily. It's you have to staff the whole thing in order. So it's the same staffing ratio for one youth in there, or if it's full of 14, because you never know when you get the intakes. And now we averaged probably only, and I'd have to relook at the numbers, maybe 7 to 8 youth, 6 to 8 youth on average, but we were oftentimes full, if that makes sense, because the population is very fluid. So you'd get a weekend and you'd be full, every room full, and then by the time you get Thursday or Friday the following week, maybe you have only 3 or 4 youth. And so you always have to staff it as if it were full.
The encouraging thing about what you said is it looks and sounds as though the facility that was built for our community served our community well. It was proportional.
Oh, yes, we met the community need from my estimation when we were open. The shelter, we often had a waiting list for the shelter facility, so we might have been a little under capacity for that, but all of the years that I worked, I think our physical capacity in detention meets our need right now.
I have a couple more questions, if you'll indulge me as a committee. Did you receive any special justice reinvestment dollars in the biennium when that legislation was passed? It doesn't apply to juvenile shelter, or did it?
I don't believe it does. I don't know of any program around the state. I think it's specific to adult.
Right. I'm struck by the part-time legal person, and then when you said you currently have 131 youth in process. I just can't imagine a part-time legal person being able to accomplish adequately covering 131 separate cases. And maybe sometimes the district attorney can talk about how there could be multiple offenses on one youth. It just staggers the mind how that person can accomplish it or not. That seems like I appreciate that your proposal says that corrections is where we need to put those extra dollars, but it seems like you've got a whole host of places where it could very well go. The last question I have is, a lot of cases we have situations where, because we don't have that local match, we're leaving money on the table. I know that with the emergency services, they'll match most of the time dollar for dollar up to a set amount. And for years, we haven't appropriated any general fund dollars. We were using Title III 2008, and we couldn't use that as our match. Now we're having to use general fund because those monies have expired. How much money are we leaving potentially on the table because we are not adequately, providing you resources you can leverage?
Talking about if the facilities were open, and that's where the majority of that money was. Very rough numbers, sort of being on the spot. I would say out of that $1 million budget, 300,000 to 400,000 could be gleaned from state contracts and things like that. So it's not, when I say $1 million to open the facility, it's not.
It's not $1 million necessarily out of our general fund or discretionary funds. I think that's a really important question for this budget committee to be aware of as we go forward and prioritize. It leaves room for discussion about how we go forward. The other thing is that I liken everything that you just don't turn on a key. People often want these systems to just, oh, well, here, if we gave you, the budget committee gave you the money, you don't just turn it on and turn it off. It's likened to me for my energy background, a coal-fired facility. It takes a couple of months to turn one off, and it can take a couple of months to turn one back on. And the case for you could be even longer than that. And So I think we need to take that into consideration. So thank you very much. Are there further questions? Ms.
I
Moore?
I would just like to clarify what I heard. Do I understand this correctly, that with $1 million more than you have now, you could reopen the facility, and that up to, say, $300,000 of that could be matching funds? So $700,000 more would reopen our juvenile correctional facility, is that what I'm hearing?
Those are very rough numbers and really predicated on two things. The shelter program that we did contract with the state is the bulk of that money, and assuming you could get the contract back, that has been gone since 2000. So there's some assumptions in there, but if all of those things lined up, yes, that would be very close.
Thank you.
That was essentially, I heard the $1 million and I was trying to tie it to something. So if we've got $1 million requirement, in effect, we double the budget, or we use 70% of that if we're talking a net option.
Correct. And as Commissioner Herron mentioned, the things like legal staff, the building that we have now and the services that we provide now, you need more FTE to handle that additional volume also, so it's spread out over the entire department.
Right. Okay. Well, good. I think we've got something to chew on, certainly. Appreciate your presentation.
Thank you.
Next in our lineup, we have our esteemed district attorney. To both of you, I know how busy you are, just given the last presentation. I want to thank you on behalf of the committee for taking time out of your day to make this important presentation.
Good evening, Budget Committee. Ryan Wilkins, Josephine County District Attorney.
Pull the microphone up or speak up just a bit.
Thank you. Good evening. Here to present a submitted budget from my office for fiscal year 2016-2017. This is the work that we do in the District Attorney's Office. These are our mandated services, what we must do for the community. Number one, we attend court and prosecute crimes in Josephine County. We attend and advise the grand jury. Every single criminal case must be presented to a grand jury. Every single felony case must be presented to a grand jury. We provide crime victim assistance. We collect unpaid child support. As Mr. Goodwin mentioned, we assist the juvenile department in juvenile delinquency cases. We assist the Department of Human Services in juvenile dependency cases. And we also work with options to conduct mental commitment hearings. We get this work done by breaking the office into 3 units. One, criminal prosecution, which I think is the most visible unit of my office to the community. 2, we have our Victims Assistance Office. And then finally, our Family Support or Child Support Enforcement unit. Criminal prosecution, our main function, we review police reports. Basically, police reports submitted from our 3 law enforcement agencies here in the county, that being the Grants Pass City PD, Josephine County Sheriff's Office, and Oregon State Police. When appropriate, we file criminal cases in court. Appropriate meaning when the law enforcement agency presents us with sufficient evidence to prove a crime beyond a reasonable doubt. After cases are filed, we negotiate criminal cases. If negotiations are unable to reach a conclusion in a case, we take the case to trial before a jury, judge, and a courtroom. We represent the state of Oregon at sentencing and probation violation hearings. We advise police agencies on legal issues, and we assist in the preparation of search and arrest warrants to make sure that they're legally sufficient, so evidence that we are collecting can stand up in court. Evidence that the law enforcement agencies are collecting to assist us in our prosecution. The submitted budget for 2016-2017 provides for 18.2 FTEs in the criminal prosecution unit. That breaks down to 9.2 attorneys and 9 support staff. In last year's adopted budget, we had 17.1 FTE, which was 8.1 attorneys and 9 support staff. This is the workload of our criminal prosecution unit. These numbers are a little hard to see, but as you can see, we reviewed 1,341 police reports in the past 3 months. The majority of that increase from the quarter of October 2015 to December of 2015, so that roughly 200 additional reports reviewed basically came from an increase of support submitted from the Grants Pass Police Department and the Josephine County Sheriff's Office. In fact, what I found interesting looking at these statistics was that last quarter, we saw the highest level of referrals from our Sheriff's Office since we had seen, since 2012. This is some of the work that we have done. Past fiscal year, we filed 2,017 criminal cases between July 1, 2014 and June 30th, 2015. In those 2,000 criminal cases, we issued 3,888 individual charges. And then, of course, in those 2,000 cases, we've got everything from the most serious crime in the state of Oregon, aggravated murder, child sexual abuse, robbery, down to the theft from Walmart to the trespassing in downtown. I mean, everything. So far, in this fiscal year, we have filed 1,937 criminal cases and issued 3,643 individual charges. Again, we have charged and filed everything. We've got everything occurring in Josephine County: aggravated murder, child sexual abuse, robbery, everything. Interestingly, in the past 9 months, we have almost filed more cases than we filed in all of 2014, 2015. We've been able to do that because of increased staffing. Because of the number of attorneys and support staff I have in my office, we are able to handle the workload presented to us by our law enforcement agencies. This calendar year, so far, well, between January 1, 2016 and March 30th, 2016, we filed 769 criminal cases. We're currently able to prosecute all cases referred by law enforcement with legal merit. If we did not have the staffing level that we are currently at, we would not have been able to prosecute that number of cases. There's a caveat to that. That 769 cases filed does not account all of the crime in Josephine County. Our sheriff is not able to provide full rural patrol, and therefore crimes are committed in the county that are not investigated and not referred for prosecution. If our sheriff's office had full rural patrol and he was able to investigate all crime occurring in the county and submit that to my office for prosecution, I would need more staff to handle that increase in demand. But right now, with the number of law enforcement officers we have serving the citizens of Josephine County, my office is adequately staffed to handle all of the demand for service currently. Moving to our Victims Assistance Unit. We have 3.35 FTEs in the Victims Assistance Unit. It costs us roughly $193,000 to run this unit of the office. We are able to obtain grants to cover $183,000 of that cost. Those grants are not just free money, however. It takes a lot of work to maintain those grants. There are many, many hours put in to making sure that my office receives that grant money so that we can provide the highest level of crime victim service that we can. Here's some examples of the work done by my Victims Assistance Office. We distributed 1,444 victim packets. That means we offered services to 1,444 citizens in fiscal year 2014-2015. We requested over $500,000 in restitution on behalf of crime victims, and I got a figure from the Oregon Judicial Department late after I submitted my PowerPoint presentation, but we actually had ordered into judgments $536,164 in restitution for crime victims here in Josephine County. We also were able to obtain over $40,000 in crime victim compensation. This service is constitutionally mandated. It must happen. And as I noted, the Victims Assistance Office is almost entirely grant funded. Some of the actual work, the visible work that the office does, that I, having handled all of the crimes of child physical and sexual abuse and adult sexual assault for many years in the office, something that I took lots of advantage of was we have staff who can accompany victims to court. They can provide emotional support to crime victims. They can educate them on the course of their criminal case. They can help them obtain restraining orders and no contact orders. And also, they advise them of the progress of their case. They call them and let them know when the case is going before the court, and they let them know what happened a particular day in court if the victim can't be there. That, if you consider the number of cases that we are filing, that constant notification to all crime victims is a huge amount of work to get done, but they do it. If you were to come over and poke your head in my victim's assistance office, they are jumping. They are jumping in there. Nobody has idle time. They work very, very hard. This is something that I just think is a district attorney's office must have this. I prosecuted a case last fall where a little girl had been sexually abused by an uncle, and it was just her and her mother who were able to come to court, and they were all alone. And this particular defendant, he stacked the courtroom with his family and I think other supporters of him. And in my opinion, they were doing that to try and intimidate this girl and her mother. And I was able to send a representative of my office with them to court every single day for basically a week-long trial. That was a huge service to them, for that little girl and her mom, to have somebody walking down the hall with them on their way to and from the courtroom so that they did not feel alone and intimidated. And it was just very important to me that there was somebody with them. I tried to be with them as much as I could, but I needed to be prepared to try and win this case on their behalf. And so having someone from my office who could do that for them was very, very, very valuable. The Child Support Enforcement Division. These are the main tasks of that unit or division of the office. We establish paternity when necessary. We get child support orders set up, established, modify child support orders when appropriate. Maybe someone should be paying less child support. We can modify the order for that, or if someone should be paying more, we modify the order up. And then, of course, if somebody is not voluntarily paying to support their children, then we step in, get the case before the court, and try and get that money ordered. Here are some statistics on the work done over fiscal year 2014-2015. 931 children and families served. It's a lot of citizens receiving service. About $5.5 million in child support collected. That figure accounts for all child support paid in Josephine County, both voluntarily and involuntarily. The bottom figure is, in my opinion, the most interesting in that we were able to get ordered or collected about $1.1 million in back child support. That's a lot of money going to children and families that should have been paid but wasn't. We were able to get that money to children and families, which I'm proud of. Assisting the juvenile department. Mr. Goodwin had mentioned some of these tasks. We review police reports regarding juvenile delinquency to see if there's sufficient evidence to file a criminal case and make the determination on what criminal charges, if any, are appropriate. We assist with creating the legal document. In adult court, you call it a district attorney's information, or an indictment. You call it a delinquency petition in juvenile court. So we work with the juvenile department to actually prepare that legal document for filing. Take delinquency cases to trial when they need to be tried, and we provide support to juvenile crime victim assistance. Assistance to the Department of Human Services. And we assist the Department of Human Services in child dependency cases. And a child dependency case is a case regarding children who are badly neglected or exposed to dangerous behaviors like drug activity, methamphetamine use, heroin use, for example. If you saw some of the scenarios in which the Department of Human Services in my office gets involved in a child's life, some of the conditions that children in our county have been found living in, it's shocking, you know. So we actually get money from the Department of Human Services to help see these cases through court. We get about $38,000 a year from DHS to help, and we use that to offset the salary of the deputy district attorney who is going to court and working those cases on behalf of DHS or with DHS. Mental commitment hearings, we coordinate with our community mental health treatment provider, which is Options of Southern Oregon. Somebody will make a complaint or let it be known to Options that a member of our community is suffering a mental health crisis. We prepare mental health civil commitment cases for trial and take mental health civil commitment cases to trial. Generally speaking, if someone, because of a serious mental illness, is unable to provide for their basic needs, or they are a danger to their self or others, then one of these civil commitment cases is started, and we see those through to completion. Here are submitted and or proposed budget figures. Total submitted budget of $2,146,600. That figure coming from two sources: department revenue from outside sources and an allocation from the general fund. District Attorney's Office, my office, is able to generate revenue from these sources. We get some state grants. For example, we get grants to help cover our victims assistance services. As I mentioned, we also were able to obtain a grant to prosecute crimes regarding violence against women. We get some revenue from fines. We generate revenue from fees charged by our department. The bulk of that is fees charged for discovery. We get interfund subsidies, and our total department revenues are $847,500 in this proposed submitted budget. General fund resources required. You see our expenses, the main expense for our office is personnel services. We need people. We need lawyers to go to court. We need support staff to help us. We don't need cars or buildings or anything. We need people and a copy machine and some computers so that we can file cases and litigate those cases in court. That's what we need money for. And then there's just a little bit of extra money that we need for paper and pens and some legal pads and, get our bar dues paid, things like that. But the vast majority of our budget is spent on attorneys and support staff. These are our goals for our upcoming fiscal year. We want to continue to prosecute all cases referred with legal merit. We're doing good work, in my opinion, now. We want to continue to partner with our local law enforcement agencies to ensure public safety as best we can. We work every single day with the City PD, Oregon State Police, Sheriff's Office. If they need us, we're there. If we need them, they are there. And then, of course, I think it's very important we want to continue to aggressively pursue collection of past due child support. People need to take care of their children. Any questions?
So if I heard you right, in 9 months, you've already handled as many cases as in the year 2000?
I think we're about 80, in the past 9 months, we are about 80 cases short of the total that we filed in fiscal year 2014-2015.
And if I heard you correctly, if the sheriff had adequate funding, you would have even more cases, and so much so that you need to have additional staff. Is that right?
I believe so, yes, sir. Yeah, I hear anecdotes, of people going to sheriff substations out in the county and just reporting property crime. They're saying that they have been ripped off, stolen from, and no investigation is conducted. No, I don't believe an officer is going to the scene and documenting evidence or trying to develop a suspect and then putting reports together and sending them to me so I can prosecute, identify somebody to identify the person who committed the crime and then file a criminal case in court. That's just not happening.
Yeah. So in your opinion then, as you look at this and we hear that stats for crime in our county are not increasing, then it's safe to say that that's just because of lack of budget and that crime is increasing. I ask this because we consider the whole area of public safety seems relevant.
Yeah, I mean, to answer, here's how I'd like to answer that question, Mr. Brombach. Regardless of whether crime is increasing or decreasing, we don't even have sufficient level of law enforcement presently in the county to handle the level of crime that we're at. Obviously, if people don't report crime, we can't generate accurate statistics. And so we have all the work that we can handle and then some. And I know, the sheriff's office, if they had full rural patrol, I know that those deputies would be investigating a lot of property crime. There's a lot of crime occurring in the county. It's my understanding it's just not getting accounted for. But regardless of where the crime level is at, we don't have adequate law enforcement out in our community to handle that level. So it's unfortunate in my opinion, sir.
Ms. Goodwin, any other questions?
Yeah. First, I'd just like to say that it's nice to hear some good news, and I'm glad to hear that you are funded and able to cover as that's coming in. And I also was very glad to hear that you got the VAWA grant last year, which you weren't sure about.
We were not sure about that, yeah. I'm not, I'm hoping, we will continue to try and get that grant, Ms. Goodwin. But, last year they kind of narrowed the focus of who they wanted those prosecution services to go to, and they were trying to limit it to certain groups that don't have a lot of representation here in Josephine County in terms of, culturally and ethnically and things. But we're going to continue to try and get that grant. We were very happy that we did get it.
I was happy to, and I hope we'll continue to get it. I had two questions, very minor questions. One is, could you explain the difference between crime victim restitution and crime victim compensation?
Yes, crime victim restitution is a dollar figure that the court is ordering a criminal defendant to repay to the victim. Basically, if a criminal defendant engages in conduct that causes a victim economic damages, lost wages, perhaps damage to an automobile or damage to a residence, they order the defendant to make payments to the court to compensate that victim for the amount of loss they suffered as a result of that crime. Crime victim compensation is money that the state gives to crime victims for other non-economic damages. For instance, in the past, crime victims compensation had given money to victims of child sexual abuse for counseling or things like that. Different than economic damages. Is that helpful?
Yes, thank you. The other question was on your sources of revenue. You mentioned the interfund subsidies, and I was just wondering what those interfund subsidies are.
Yes, interfund subsidies. For example, in certain drug cases, we were able to forfeit drug proceeds. If it's money that was the product of illegal drug transactions, we've been able to forfeit some of that money through our interagency narcotics task force, and we can use some of that money to offset costs of the office. Also, justice reinvestment dollars are included in interfund subsidies. Justice reinvestment dollars are money that the state of Oregon or Salem sent down to us to keep certain property offenders and low-level drug offenders out of the Oregon Department of Corrections, the state prison system, and keep them local here in our community receiving treatment as opposed to just housing them up in Salem. So my office got, I think we're getting roughly $100,000 a year to participate in that program, which is that's important to us because we're able to keep a deputy DA employed with that money. So as an example, those are interfund subsidies.
Thank you.
Sir. Rookie season, you got to deal with me here a little bit, okay? The interfund charges for services, is that what we were talking about just now as far as amounts? I'm looking on the budget file. Is interfund charges for services under resources? $266,000. My question, I'm assuming, is that what we're talking about?
Yeah, interfund for us is within Josephine County. Intergovernmental would be money coming from the outside from another governmental source. So
Well, I see you've got state grants under intergovernmental revenues.
Correct.
You have interfund charges for services.
interfund charges would be within Josephine County. So if he got some money from his forfeiture account, or he got money from the DA special programs account, or internally.
Can you just explain to me why we're looking at $50,000 for 1 year, $315 for the next, $266? I just don't understand the variability
So
of that.
historically, those interfund charges for services have varied fairly dramatically. I think for the low years, roughly $50,000, and then as high as $315. We're somewhere in the middle of 266 proposed for the next fiscal year.
The new money of the JRI is Justice Reinvestment Act money is a lot of that increase. But so if you go to the Public Safety Fund, which is the very beginning of the.
Yeah, Mr. O'Hare, would you mind using the microphone, not only so everybody can hear you at home, but we don't make you repeat it or rhyme.
Okay. I think, of course, Brian knows where his money's coming from, and sometimes we categorize it different than what, maybe you would, anybody else would. But if you look at the resource requirement page, which is at the beginning of the Public Safety Fund section, you will see down at the lower end of the first page, it calls it interfund transfers. So that's the money that's coming from within the county to this fund. And you'll see that the DA has two specific sources of revenue that's coming to him, DA forfeiture and DA special projects CAMI. And so you can see where the revenues have fluctuated over the years and what that represents there, either through forfeiture or the CAMI funding.
So how would you come up with that much variability? How do you come up with your proposal? In other words, how do you come up with?
Well, partly what's happening with, I know with CAMI, and excuse me for butting in on that one, but partly what's happening with CAMI is whether they end up needing those funds or not. So I know that in part they'll budget a transfer in case it's needed, depending on what the level of expenditures are. And if it's needed, great, they'll move it. If it's not, then they'll move it forward to the next year to have it available. So that might account for why you see sometimes it's budgeted, but maybe in the actual column it doesn't happen. Is that what you were thinking? Or
Can you define CAMI?
It's a child abuse multidisciplinary intervention team. Yeah. And Mr. Welch, sir, additional explanation there would be that, one, the justice reinvestment money, the money that the state of Oregon sent down to keep low-level offenders out of the Department of Corrections, and then also we have that forfeiture account. It can build and build and build based on drug proceeds forfeited, and we're spending money out of that account this year than the past years we had to spend. Is that helpful?
Thank you.
Yes.
Any other questions?
Sir?
One, you're emphasizing the whole concept of this is a criminal justice system.
Yes.
So which you are one cog, important cog in that, but it is a system.
Absolutely.
Where if one fluctuates, it affects the whole, or decelerates, the whole thing is impacted to some degree. And the other one, to just throw it out the kudos to Judge Wolke, he has really done a masterful job, I believe, in this mental health court in dealing with some of these folks, instead of having to park them in the jail, try to work with them to see them attain some sense of normalcy. And that's not reflected directly here, though the processing in some of those things is, but the mental health court is I think, a tremendous asset for the county to have.
It is. In the long run, it saves resources opposed to having somebody with mental illness just, spend a night in jail and right back out in the community where they're constantly being contacted by law enforcement because they're exhibiting behaviors that are concerning and people are calling law enforcement. Somebody gets in mental health court, they're monitored by a probation officer to make sure that they're participating in mental health treatment, taking medication if need be, so that they are on a level. So yes, the mental health court is very important. I like to analogize in my mind the criminal justice system like a motor vehicle, and my office is just one part of that car, and if all parts of the car aren't working, then the vehicle itself does not function. So, yes, sir.
And I'd like to echo what Commissioner Heck said, just watching the mental health court, you can see these people would be continual offenders in many, many cases, except for the help that he gives and the team that he has working with him. In the same vein, I'd like to compliment you and your office for the help you give to help citizens get involved in this whole process of our public safety. The help you've been to North Valley Community Watch, going to their meetings, sharing with them, and helping with the development of crime scene investigation on the part of private people where that's appropriate, can be responsibly done. I just think with the limited budget we have, it's wonderful to see you working with the private sector to help us get responsibly involved as citizens, and thank you for that.
Thank you.
Any other Thank you very much. Unless it's terribly explicit for everybody, I think where I was looking for the general fund requirement, it's pretty obvious after I just kind of think about it a second. The total resources provided are those that are not general fund dependent, and you subtract the total requirements minus that general resources. And I think you come up with what the general fund ask is. Is that correct, Arthur? Because I was looking for how much have we typically appropriated
If you
the
look at,
district attorney's office over the years.
specifically for district attorney, yeah,
Well, that's
correct.
the one, but I think you can take that to go for every other one.
Right.
There's no line item that says general fund allocation, and that's kind of what I was looking for. Are we proportionally?
If you look at the, let's see, I didn't create one, I guess. No, there it is. On page 6, if you look at the, page 6 of the public safety section, there is the district attorney there, and then there you will see the resources and requirements piece. So all the money that he's getting in versus the money that he's spending, and the difference there, 1.299, would be your support from general fund, beginning fund balance, those numbers.
That might be a helpful line at the bottom of just comparing apples and oranges, but we can talk about that offline because we have scheduled to keep 17 minutes to go over a couple of different deals. Bring me to a point, I saw a number of people on the budget committee who were scribbling notes frantically. It would be really helpful, I think, for everybody to have copies of PowerPoints when they're given. If they're in here, I missed it. If they're not, I'd love to have those.
The PowerPoints will be available, we've always made them available after the meeting.
Sometimes we've had them available so that we could go through them as
There's
they're
been
being
occasions,
given.
it depends on how quick
Yeah.
the presenters are to get it put together.
Okay. I think if I have a head nod from a majority of the committee who would probably like to not scribble down things that are out there, and we could try to make that, I think that would be great.
Yeah.
Try to work on that. You can stay there because I think you're going to be hosting the next 2 or 3 items. Item number 7 is Budget Committee establishes a meeting calendar, proposed dates, meeting from 4 to 6, and I think that time frame has already been agreed upon by the Budget Committee at a prior meeting. But then the proposed agenda is to have a meeting on April 21st, which is a Thursday, and then Tuesday, April 26th, with other dates as needed.
Correct. I sent out the budget calendar, the proposed or suggested calendar back February 12th, I believe it was, to the Budget Committee. But having said that, and suggested this, this has been in consultation with the Board of Commissioners, what you would like to see as far as the budget process. The feeling was that since this budget is not much difference, it's a pretty much status quo with the 15-16 current year budget, not a whole lot of program changes, not a whole lot of program fluctuations, that we're really looking at a status quo budget, and maybe our focus should be, looking towards the next future year, July 1 of 17, where the very distinct possibility that we would not have as much funding for public safety as we currently have. But that being said, regardless of what I suggested or regardless of what I propose, the Budget Committee actually sets its own calendar. The first meeting has to be published and had to be noticed in the newspaper, so that requirement has been met. We published last week in the Courier, and so that requirement has been met, and now it's up to the Budget Committee to decide when the next meeting is.
Yes, I move that we amend the budget meeting schedule so that the second meeting would be on April 26th and the third meeting would be on May 3rd.
I would second that.
Discussion?
Yes, I will not be available as I will be gone from April 29th through, actually April 28th through May 10th, May 11th.
So you could make the 26th.
I can make the 26th, but I could not make the last one.
The last one you said, May 3rd?
May 3rd.
So you're, just to clarify your motion, you're only recommending for 2 additional budget meetings, the being April 26th and May 3rd.
We have on the schedule 3 budget meetings, and the second one is scheduled 2 days from today. Since we only got the budget today, I don't feel that 2 days is enough time for me, as a budget committee member, to review the parts of the budget that we'll be looking at the next meeting. And in the past, we've always had a week between budget meetings, so I would like to have at least that amount of time to familiarize myself with the budget before we're asked to vote on it.
Okay. Anyone else for a comment on this motion to amend the current schedule, having 2 meetings of the Budget Committee, meeting on Tuesday, April 26th, and the following meeting would be May 3rd, all of those at 4 to 6. No other discussion?
I mean, it just, Mr. O'Hare, then you have been at least tangentially involved in the budget process. Can you comment on the idea that this procedure this year is an anomaly for all the preceding years as far as receiving the budget books and all that stuff?
Not really, no. I mean, in days gone by, we've had 2 meetings per week by, of course, past budget committees. So that's not unusual. And as far as the budget book availability, the last couple of years, I think we've made it available the Monday before the meeting, or the day before the meeting, I should say. Well, not necessarily on a Monday, but the day before the meeting. So it's not too far out. I would have liked to have the budget available yesterday, but I would have liked to have it available, a week ago. But sometimes the level of effort is quite a bit more than what one might think.
Well, I know that there were a number of budgets that were being worked on actually right up until the end of last week. There were last-minute changes, so they're not before us. My concern, I think we should have plenty of time for people to review this. And
Sure.
regardless, I've done a number of these where they've been similar, but we've also done them differently. I don't know that we have a precedent-setting practice that we should definitely adhere to. So I'm comfortable with giving another week lead time. I'd certainly appreciate a little bit more time to have this, to absorb it. I think something we've talked about is that the status quo directive of the board gives this not a reinvention of the wheel. So you're not starting from scratch the way we've had to do. The most subsequent budget that I think I've been a part of was the difference between 2011-12 and 12-13. And that was a significant reduction from $110 million down to roughly 68. That required some serious due diligence for prioritization of those finite minor dollars. But what I would like to make a request is that we stick with the, I don't want to say controversial, but the element for change significantly deals with the 2 departments that you've recommended for presentations, and keeping that schedule that they would be on the 26th at the next meeting, so Commissioner Walker could be present at that. Is that
I'd like to
helpful?
be present at that, but if the final meeting is May the 2nd or whatever it is, I won't be here to deliberate or make any decision. That's the final meeting.
The nice thing about a board member not being here is that they will have a recommendation of the budget committee and can make adjustments, minor be it, before adoption. So, call for the question. Okay. Please, roll call vote.
Mr. Welch?
Yay.
Ms. Goodwin? Yes. Mr. Bromack?
Yes.
Mr. Herrick?
Yes.
Mr. Heck?
Yes.
Ms. Walker?
No.
Motion carries to set the budget committee dates of April 26th and May 3rd from 4 to 6 p.m. here in Yan Basker. Meeting of the budget committee, 7 for, 1 against. And keeping with that schedule, I would assume we're going to have a sheriff and public works. Are there
I'll
other
confirm
departments
with
that you're
them.
requesting to
I wasn't requesting, but again, it's up to the board to decide if they want to hear from some. What I would like to do is begin the meeting with a brief presentation on dedicated funds, the dedicated fund concept, so that it might give a better context of what we're looking at when we say what is available to be moved or to be adjusted.
So dedicated versus discretionary?
Discretionary,
Great.
correct. And that's a, 5-10 minute PowerPoint presentation. And then, but the main issue I believe that is on everybody's mind is public safety and what should we do with public safety. So I think I gave Sheriff and Public Works the opportunity to make those presentations, and I felt that would be, it would take some time to consider those things.
Yeah. Are there any objections to those two departments presenting next time? Are there any other recommended departments that you'd like to hear from that haven't either been presenting so far on the schedule or?
Mr. Chair, I would like to have a presentation at the third meeting from the Forestry Department.
Okay.
And I would also like, even though this is not a department, but for the sake of transparency, since there's been so much controversy about the economic development funds, I would like to have a presentation on how the economic development funds are allocated.
What was the first one? I missed that.
Forestry.
Oh, forestry.
So there's been a request for 2 additional. I'd like to have all of the requests out there and then we can deliberate on those. So are there any other additional department or program budgets that you'd like to spend additional time on?
Can I just make a comment?
Yeah.
Given the fact that I haven't reviewed the budget,
Yeah.
there may be something at next meeting that we could bring up.
Good point. Oh, okay. So I think out of consideration for Commissioner Walker as liaison to the community economic development and those dollars, would it be appropriate to try to see if we can have that presentation at the 26th budget hearing?
We're going to have 2 presentations that day, Sheriff's and Public Works. So unless we add time to the meeting,
But with the 2-hour meeting, depending on the
We should certainly
extent
be
of
able
the
to.
discussion, that's where the time will be taken, I believe. But just as a matter of presentations, if we have a 10-15 minute presentation by each department, along with time for questions,
Gives us an hour. I should think.
I would think that those 3 could work.
but the other thing I was going to say is that I could prepare comments and you have all the financial information that it could be done on May 3rd, if, my absence. So but that would put a little bit more onto Arthur. So
Well, the nice thing is we've done the due diligence of that back.
yeah, I mean, we have all the information, so it's not like this, and this is a budget type thing. So budget-wise, Arthur has all the information. So Arthur, and then he could make the presentation. Because I don't want the sheriff and on the Public Works to be shorted in regards to the opportunity to make their presentation, because I'm sure there's going to be a lot of questions and discussion at that meeting. And so I don't want to have anyone to have to rush through a presentation.
The other caveat with the economic development funds is those are granted to the county with pretty explicit direction, but then there's some general direction that is, fairly at full discretion of the board. So there aren't any state mandates other than those 4 departments that are outset. So that presentation could be fairly short and sweet, and I imagine we can do that at the last meeting if you're comfortable with that.
Yeah, I don't mind if you don't, having Arthur make that financial presentation, and I can talk to him about any of the information that needs to be included.
Just Arthur might.
That's what I'm saying. I don't want to make him feel like he's on the spot, but he has all the financial information anyway, and that's pretty much what it is. It's just numbers.
Either way, I'm comfortable.
We'll work that out
Yeah.
as the schedule allows, as best we can. I want to try to keep us as close to 4 and 6 as possible, and we have public comment left on our agenda for today. So if there's nothing further with the schedule set out, Ms. Goodwin.
Mr. Chair, I had asked earlier if I could that there was a comment that I wanted to make, but I wanted to wait till after the department heads make their presentation.
Sure.
So I didn't waste their time. For the past 10 years, our stated budget policy has been to do budgeting for outcomes. And it has stated that in our budget book. And the budget book has defined that as a type of zero-based budgeting and a top-to-bottom review of everything from the citizens' perspectives and priorities. This year, for the first time in 10 years, our budget book doesn't say anything about budgeting for outcomes. Instead, our new policy is on page 4. A status quo budget is required unless change is supported by revenue. Unfortunately, this means that we cannot reallocate funds from one department to another based on changing requirements or priorities. It has to be based on a change in revenue. A status quo budget is appropriate when there are no significant budget issues. It's appropriate when everything is going smoothly, so there's no need to make changes from year to year. But that's not the situation of our county right now. And I realize that the board directed the budget officer to prepare a status quo budget, but I think that that's not appropriate. We are not in a situation where there are no significant budget issues. All over the county, we're hearing about a fiscal emergency, whether one is occurring now or whether one is imminent. A status quo budget is not appropriate when we're facing a fiscal emergency. In fact, budgeting for outcomes as a zero-based budgeting process is the most appropriate budgeting type of process for when you have a fiscal emergency or you're facing one imminently. In zero-based budgeting, you start from scratch. You don't start from last year's budget. You start from zero. And the first thing you do is you determine the must-haves. And in a county government budget, the must-haves are those services that are mandated by state law. And then you assess the minimal cost to deliver those must-have services. The next thing you go on to is the should-haves, and these would be services that are not necessarily mandated by law, but services that the citizens expect from their county government. And then if you're able to cover all your should-haves and there's money left over, you go on to the nice-to-haves. But in our budget, we can't cover all of our should-haves. And that's where the top-down prioritization from the customers, the citizens' perspective comes in. So you start at the top, you stack rank your should-have services from the citizens' priorities, based on citizens' priorities. And then you start at the top and you go work your way down, assessing what is the minimal cost to provide each of the should-have services in priority order, based on the citizen priorities. When you run out of money, you're done, because you've already covered the highest priority services, and because you have allocated the minimum budget to cover those, you have covered as many as possible. And budgeting is all about prioritization. And if we believe that we don't have a minimally adequate level of funding for public safety in our county, but we do have adequate levels of funding of service in other departments in the discretionary budget, then we're not budgeting as effectively as we could. And I don't think a status quo budget is appropriate under those circumstances.
So I think that's a topic for discussion. Unfortunately, due to our time here today, I don't believe we have time to discuss that. There's a lot of things I could say about that, having served on this budget committee for going on 6 years and going over status quo budget, having made some of those prior determinations. But I'm going to hold off, as I would like the budget committee to ponder your statement and be able to react to that at the April 26th meeting. I really want to accommodate one of the things that's prescribed on our agenda is public comment, and to do so in a time fashion as we'd set out based on their expectation. So not to cut you off or not to cut off rebuttal, but or a conversation, because I think it's appropriate. It's something we should talk about. But at this time, without objection of the committee, I'd like to open up for public comment. And Ms. Casanelli in the back, you can go first. You've got 3 minutes to discuss the elements of the budget that have either been presented or requests you have for future budget.
Casanelli, Merlin, Oregon. I object to the process of this budget committee meeting today. In the county's notice of this public meeting that was published, it states, quote, "A copy of the budget document may be inspected or obtained on or after Monday, April 18th at the Board of County Commissioners office between the hours of 8:30 and 4 p.m. and will be available on the county website under Finance Department Budget Information," unquote. As per the notice, you did not post the budget yesterday. In fact, it was not posted as of today at 1:15 p.m. Only 2 hours before this meeting was it finally made available to the public. Hardly enough time to read such a lengthy, detailed document. I know according to ORS 294.4626, it says that the budget must be made available at the first budget committee meeting. But you know what? It made me wonder. So I did a little survey and asked other counties approximately how many days did the public and budget committee have in order to preview the fiscal year 16-17 budget before your first session. Guess what the results were? Yamahill County gave their public 55 days. Jackson County gave them 27. Umatilla 21. Wallowa and Clackamas gave 14 days. Lincoln gave 12. Klamath gave 10. Lynn gave 9. Tillamook gave 8. Lane, Lake, Hood, and Douglas gave 7. Columbia gave 2. And poor little Josephine County, along with Coos County, gave 0. It seemed that once again we're at the bottom of the barrel. I guess Commissioner Hare can no longer make the statement that Josephine County is the most transparent county in the world. With actions like this, it's little wonder why Josephine County citizens don't trust those in government. You know, there's no reason for this. Other counties can get their acts together and submit budgets to the public before the first budget session. Even they give their budget committee even more time than the public. That's 1.1. Point 2, I do believe the status quo budget is inappropriate. You've been running around saying that we're in a fiscal emergency or imminent fiscal emergency, and yet we have a budget pretty much as usual from last year. These are really inappropriate. I wish that you would take in consideration what the citizens say. Thank you.
Anyone else, Mr. Howard? Mr. name and address for the record, sir.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, Budget Committee members, my name is Harold Howland. I live in Josephine County. I just want to point out this is my first appearance to the Budget Committee as a private citizen since 1979. My comments today are going to be related to the District Attorney's Office. And before I do that, I just want to compliment District Attorney Molken. This is the first presentation in all the years I was involved that I felt was very good. It was clear and very concise. And I just want to compliment him on that and his staff because he did an excellent job on that. The other part of it is I think his staff, based upon what I've seen, has done an excellent job. And what I'm going to be presenting has nothing to do with disabilities or the abilities office. It's a concept. I've talked to both Commissioner Hare and Commissioner Heck on several different occasions, years and separately. Well, I think Simon, I talked to him about 4 years ago on this, and Commissioner Heck probably in the last year. I haven't talked to Commissioner Walker on this, but I'm going to read my statement and I'll hand it out to you afterwards. This is a history. Up until the late 1970s, the district attorney in Josephine County was the county legal counsel. The Board of Commissioners decided to hire a part-time legal counsel, and this is in the late 70s, as they were unable to get the response to their legal questions from the district attorney. The district attorney at the time was Robert Burrows, and he did not feel their request was a high priority as he was a prosecutor first. Excuse me. So we hired a part-time counsel in the late 70s and became a full counsel probably just in the late 1979. That's Dwayne Schultz was the counsel. The counties throughout the state of Oregon have used the district attorney as their legal counsel and paid a subsidy to the district attorney's salary for that services. Josephine County has continued to pay the subsidy even though the district attorney does not provide a legal advice to the county commissioners. And what I point out is everything he pointed out today was involving state law. He's a state official, and what he was pointing out to you is everything he has to meet as a state official of state law. The practice is still in place in many of the Oregon counties, and that is that they do not provide any legal counsel to county commissioners. Prosecution. Historically, the cost of prosecution in the district attorney's office has been paid with county funds, as it is today, and as you heard this last year, it was paid as well. When the district attorney goes into the court to prosecute crimes, he opens with, quote, on behalf of the state of Oregon, not on the behalf of Josephine County, not on the behalf of the city of Grants Pass, but on behalf of the state of Oregon. Based upon the fact that the district attorney is a state elected official and he prosecutes folks who have committed crime against the state and does not prosecute people who have violated county laws. Recommendation. I recommend that the Josephine County Commissioners submit a letter to the Governor of the State of Oregon that beginning on July 2017, I think it's a little too late for this budget year, the county would no longer provide county funding for the prosecution costs, which is really the responsibility of the state and her office as governor. This would provide them with plenty of opportunity to review their budget and establish their priorities on funding. I believe there is money available, it is just a matter of priorities. Question?
I think we'll wait a little bit for any additional comments.
Could I make a couple of quick things?
If I allow you to, Mr. Haugen, and
Okay.
I hate to do this because
That's fine.
I have to for everyone else.
I appreciate
hate
that.
to ask you to come back, but I'd also like to suggest that there are an opportunity to make comments to the Board of Commissioners office that we can actually present those to the Budget Committee at any given time.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Haugen. I almost called you Commissioner. Ms. Harris?
No.
Bad habits, old habits.
Thank you for this. Harriet Harris and Wonder, Oregon. Couple of things. One, if you consider that Mr. West's idea of rewarding people who are reelected is worth pursuing, what I wanted to suggest going with a bonus instead of with a pay increase that would give some compensation to the person without increasing their salary, which would then entail a retirement benefit for a long-term obligation. Is it appropriate to be giving suggestions? I mean, I don't
Yes,
know.
absolutely.
Okay, so then another suggestion was, and I too love the district attorney, the volunteers that go our victim support, that might be something that could be a volunteer position. And then listening to the difficulty of working to maintain the grants. I understand Commissioner Walker, in fact, enlightened me just recently that you've upgraded your IT. And do the IT systems talk to each other between departments, and do they assist people in meeting the requirements of these grants? And will that show any better efficiency and reduced workload? Thank you.
Questions? Thank you very much. Yes, Mr. Hunker and then Mr. Matthews. Sorry, it's dark back there in the corner.
Dark outside soon. Bill Hunker, Merlin, Oregon. I just wanted to say that with the budgets that's been presented here, and then also what is before the county commission right now, of a physical emergency and what that may entail, we certainly don't know how far that's going to go or how far you commissioners would like to take it. But I can see that if that was pursued, that it could impact a lot of what's going on in this area. We've got things that are untried with the governor and an intergovernmental committee and all of that would mean. And I think that the budget committee needs to be aware and ready to say, how do we respond to that as it happens? Because that'll happen fairly rapidly as has been addressed. It needs to go in soon. So that would impact the work here at the center of the budget. So that's, I just feel that we've got two things going right now, and they're, I can't say diametrically opposed, but they certainly could interact far differently than we may say, oh, we're just going to roll over another budget for next year. That sounds good right now, but if indeed we are going to move with the governor, that's a lot of unknowns, and something has to be done to say, okay, we could do this to here, and then from there on we could do something else. But just to say, let's roll the budget over, is to kind of discount what's going on with the county commissioners at this point. And the only other thing I'd say, it's interesting, I had not heard Larry West's comments about a 5% increase if you're reelected. And I can see some real value in a bonus or 5%, with the exception of those who never ran against anybody. Seems like it's just a put your money in, and you put your name in, and you get 5%. And there's no competition. There is no anybody that you're going up against, with the exception of the three commissioners. No, there's no second person you're training. So that's an interesting concept. I think I would be amenable to looking at it if you had somebody you're running against. But if you're just putting your name in every time, maybe it's good. But I would go with what Harriet had said, that a bonus that doesn't add on PERS and add on a lot of other things that we're looking at in the future would be probably preferable. That's all.
Thank you, Mr. Hunker. Mr. Matthews?
Dale Matthews, Grants Pass. So the elected officials compensation committee has suggested perhaps a bonus would be in store for you. I might even look at that if I knew that there was an equal demerit that would be given to commissioners to come up with ideas like the junk ordinances that were defeated 80% to 20. You know, you should get dinged for that. Or maybe cut a check back to the people of Josephine County for such a bad idea. This was government talking to government. And guess what? You all agreed with each other. Let's have a status quo budget, even though you've been telling us it's an emergency. How can you have a status quo budget when it's an emergency? Kind of flies in the face of common sense, doesn't it? Everyone's been instructed, well, let's all do it the same way we did last time. It's not an emergency. For years now, you've promised us that your number one and number three priority was to use technology and openness to communicate with the public about what's going on with this. This time, even you were burned by that, and you didn't see the budget till today. Now, this is leaving out an important thing. It's leaving out the public altogether. You don't care. It just doesn't matter to you that we've seen it. We would like to know what's in it, so that we can get up and say something smart instead of what I'm doing. It doesn't make any sense. So here's my message to you from the people of Josephine County. This is your last time, all of you, with the exception of maybe one of you, to serve on this committee. Where's your objection to the public not having access to anything? You've objected that you didn't. What about us? Either the deadline should have been met or you should have pushed back this meeting. Because we don't know what's going on and we're your number one priority, or should be. So you and the finance director will be swept out. And we're going to make sure that the people who are serving up there do take us into account first, not last or zero. So enjoy your time in the sun. This is your last year. Thank you.
Anyone else for public comment? I think it's the expectation of this committee to receive public comment at each of our budget meetings, so this won't be your last and only, unless your Commissioner Harold Agnews after to come back until for another couple of years, 30 or so. Anything further for the good of the order? Anyone care to respond to the comments so far, or?
There's a couple of things I would like to respond to, Mr. Chair. Yes, one of the comments in regards to the grants tracking. Every grant has different tracking requirements, different timeframes, different reporting requirements. There's no standardization as far as reporting on the grants. Many of them are handled in our budget department, finance department, and some are managed in the individual departments. So they're all very different. There isn't a single system that we can standardize them, so to speak. There are certain requirements they all have, but they all have different time frames. So yeah, we try to do that. Thank you. And I would like to say something about the fiscal emergency situation when it comes to the budget. Knowing we were going into the budget season, it seemed that the discussion on the fiscal situation in Josephine County and on the budgeting and on the various departments had stagnated. It was all about this almost circular argument. We don't have money, so we don't have patrols. We don't have money, so we don't have jail. And it was that circular argument constantly. No more taxes, no more levies, no more, we have problems, kind of thing. And we were attempting to bring forward as a board of county commissioners, not as a budget committee, but as a board of county commissioners, a budget advisory question on the issue of the fiscal emergency, and that was tabled. So I decided that I would, as an individual commissioner, write a draft letter based on the House Bill 3453 with the entire purpose of bringing that issue forward to get that discussion off the center's point of stagnation. No one else was talking about any other idea. I had brought forward the idea in regards to smorgasbord, some people call it, or a la carte idea, and that couldn't get out of the board. Feedback was very good on that. But there was no opportunity for discussion because it was never put out into the community. And this, I thought, would prompt a discussion. And it would also prompt our legislators to finally come forward and say something about what they would and wouldn't support. They hadn't done that either. So I think it's done that. We now know where they stand on the $2 bill, so to speak. We know where they stand on the governor's issue. We know where they stand on the taxes in the community. And we also know that about a lot of our community leaders. So now we have the discussion out there. Once you know where people stand, you can work on that. So hopefully that will foster the discussion over the next year to bring forward some solutions so that this next year's budget committee will have something to work with. And people making insinuations and allegations about the financial health or lack of thereof of the Josephine County budget or fiscal situation, it's very good. We have a very good finance department. We have very good accounting practices. We have people say we need audits. We're audited every year. So I think we have a very good budget and fiscal program going on in Josephine County. We just lack revenue. If we had the revenue, that takes me to the next question, the next issue, in regards to I think Ms. Casnelli made the comments about getting the budget, her 3 minutes spent on getting the budget on time. All the counties that she mentioned have much larger tax bases, which means they probably have a lot more employees. If you have a very limited number of employees trying to meet deadlines, and you're trying to get budgets from county department heads that are working department heads, don't sit at a desk and just do budgeting and staffing all day long. They're out there doing the job. Some of them are in the field, some of them are having to go do the checks. Some of them actually do the work of going out and doing something. For instance, our department's head, Diane Hoover, was actually cleaning dog pens 2 years ago when the water froze. So, and I know that many of our, like Rob Brandis, he doesn't just sit in his office out there. He's out there with his crews. So when you have people who are working and doing the work of their department, meeting the deadlines, monitoring the grants, doing all those things that they have to do to keep their department running, sitting down and putting a budget together is very time consuming, and they oftentimes are doing it after hours. So when you're talking about staffing, it takes money. And people wonder about prosperity in our county and getting more revenue and more jobs here. Why do they go to these other counties that have higher tax bases? Because they have the services. Prosperity breeds prosperity. So when we talk about our department not being able to get something out 10 days in advance or 20 days in advance, just look at who has to provide the information to them. They're working department heads, and that gets into a department that's understaffed as well. So, you know, let's cut them some slack here. And we did, contrary to Mr. Matthews, they did meet the statutory requirement of presenting it at the budget meeting. The first budget meeting, that is the requirement, and it was met. So I don't want people to think that our departments are slacking, but if they're not getting it in, they are. It's done. So anyway, moving on. That's all I had to say, Mr. Chair.
Push.
We're running almost a half an hour behind schedule, and I hate to do that. So, Ms. Goodwin, you have a comment?
I do.
Short and sweet.
Yeah, I actually had two, but I'll save one for later. The one that I just want to mention now was in response to what Harold Haugen said. And it sounds like what he was saying is that there is an opportunity for the state to cover some of the prosecution costs that the county is currently covering.
So I'm going to stop you right there. That's a great conversation for another meeting.
Okay.
It's not a topic relative to the public comments. No, we're going to have to close this one.
All right.
We'll have that conversation next time. Stay tuned. We'll be back here on April 26th, 4 o'clock. We'll be happy to discuss those things with Arthur O'Hare or our district attorney's office. And anything else that you have, I just want to remind you that you're not to deliberate with other committee members while the budget has been released, which we got today, and until the duration of the budget is completed and finalized. So go have coffee, but don't talk about this. With anything further, no objection to adjourning. I don't have a pretty clock, but it's 6:22. We're adjourned. Yeah, it's okay.
Can we talk? Yeah.
We have a meeting on Monday.
Still, every year they talk to each other about budgeting.
He's saying,